Greetings to all. Today we are going to read the fourth chapter of history, that is tribal communities. In this chapter we will read about tribal way of life, how did the British rule affect the tribals and tribal revolts. Children, you know tribal means Adivasis. In general we can say them Adivasis. These people live in dense forest area, hilly tracts where we can't reach easily. There were many tribal groups in India. They had a distinct culture of their own. How British occupied tribal lands, this we will read in this chapter. From being a mere trading company, English East India Company became the master of India. Its rule affected all sections of the society, especially tribal societies. They resisted the changes brought by the British. Now we will read about the tribal way of life, and before it I will tell you about the different tribal groups in India. There were many tribal groups in India: the Mundas, the Santhals, and the Oryans in the Chota Nagpur region, the Baigas, Gonds, and Khonds in the central India, and the Khasis and the Nagas in the northeast. Apart from them, Baluchis, Khokhars, Gakkars, Bhils, and Kolis tribes are also found in India. Now, children, you know tribal people never allowed any outsider to intermingle with them. They did not follow the caste rules laid down by the Brahmins. There were more equality among them. They didn't have any written record of their history. They never they are close to nature. They passed their customs and traditions orally to their generations. They dependent on natural resources. Some tribes were settled down in an area while others spent nomadic life, means they moved from one place to another place in search of pasture land for their cattle or water sources and all that. Now we will read about the shifting cultivation. Tribal societies were engaged in different activities like shifting cultivation. In this, a plot of land is cleared by felling the trees, and trees are burned. Ashes are mixed with the soil to make it fertile. When soil loses its fertility, the land is abandoned, means left, and the cultivator moves to a new plot. Now, I will tell you about the different activities by which tribal communities spend their life. Most of tribes were lived by hunting, gathering, herding, rearing, and doing settled agriculture. Tribals were dependent on forest for their needs. They collected fruits, roots, medicinal herbs, and honey. They consumed these produce themselves or sold in the local market. Some tribal groups exchanged milk and milk products, wool for rice and other grains. It is known as barter system. For firewood also they were dependent upon the forest. When a forest was no longer to supply their needs, they moved to another forest. Some tribal groups dependent on herding and animal rearing. They were nomads. They moved from one place to another in search of the pasture land for their animals. With time, some tribes started settled cultivation near their house. The land belonged to the clan, means group of families. They they shared the harvested crop according to their needs. In the 19th century, the Mundas and the Santhals took to settled agriculture in a big way. Now, I will tell you about how did the British rule affect the tribals. British rule led to many changes in the tribal setup. The company took over large tracts of lands cultivated by the tribals. The landless tribals became wage or paid laborers and were forced to grow cash crops like cotton, indigo, etc. They resisted the loss of their land. Tribals dispossessed of their land. British allowed some groups to retain their land. For this, they would pay the high revenue to the British. High revenue was demanded by the British, and it was fixed. If they were unable to pay, they were evicted from their land, means they had to leave the land and they became forced labor. Now, settled agriculture. The company declared forest as a state property, means company declared that the forests are the government's property, and hunting, gathering, shifting, cultivation were prohibited in the forest. Tribals were not allowed to stay in the forest. They started protest against these laws. Now, changes in forest law. Though tribals were self-sufficient, but for something they had to dependent on outsiders, and changed they charged very high prices for the goods they sold to tribals. Sometimes tribals took loans from the moneylenders, and they charged high rate of interest from illiterate tribals, so they were often caught in the cycle of debt. Now, role of traders and moneylenders. Interference. This is the role of traders and moneylenders. Role of Christian missionaries. Interference of Christian missionaries in the socio-religious life of the tribals led to their misery. They became very unhappy. They resent all the activities of the missionaries. Now, tribal chiefs. Earlier, tribal chiefs enjoyed a lot of power. After the arrival of the British, they lost all their authority and became mere agents of the British. They had to make their British masters happy as well as their own people. They had to follow laws made by the British and pay them tributes. This infuriated them, means made them angry. Now we will read about the different tribal revolts. In the 19th century, many tribal revolts were there due to the interference in their traditional lifestyle. The Coal Rebellion of 1831 to 32 and the Santhal Rebellion of 1855 were major rebellion. Apart from them, Kolis, Khasis and Orients also revolted. Now we will read about the Munda Rebellion. Munda rebellion was one of the most powerful tribal revolt of the late 19th century in the Chota Nagpur region. It was led by the Birsa Munda, the Ulgulan or the Great Tumult, as it came to be called, aimed at driving out the British and their agents and establishing Munda Raj. Birsa wanted to bring back the golden age of Mundas. He wanted to free his people from the oppression of traders, moneylenders, zamindars and the British. He asked the tribals to forcefully take back the land that the British had taken away from them. This movement was also a social movement aimed at reforming tribal society. Birsa wanted people to give up liquor, performing animal sacrifices, worship of evil spirit and leading a dishonest life. The British came down heavily against the rebellion and arrested Birsa in 1895 and imprisoned him. He died soon after due to cholera. Though this movement was not successful, but sporadic protest continued. Tribal people continued protest against the British. Now we will discuss the question answers. First question, name some tribal groups of India. Write 3 features of tribal societies. There were many tribal groups in India. Orients, Santhals, Bhils, Kols, Gonds, है ना? You can easily write down in your own way. And the features of tribal societies are: they dependent upon the forest, they gathered forest produce, hunted animals and practiced shifting cultivation. What do you understand by the shifting cultivation? In shifting cultivation, a plot of land is cleared by cutting down or felling down trees. Trees are burned over there, ashes are left over there to mix within the soil to increase its fertility. Then the land is cultivated. How did the British dispossess the tribals of their land. What was its impact? Now, the company took over large tracts of land cultivated by the tribals. The landless tribals became wage laborers and were forced to grow cash crops. The tribals resisted the loss of their land as they considered themselves the natural owners of the land they had been cultivating for centuries. The tribals were often caught in the cycle of debt. Explain. The tribals were largely self sufficient. For something, they had to depend on outsiders. The traders charged very high prices for the goods they sold to the tribals. For it, they had to take short term loans from moneylenders and they charged a very high rate of interest, and so the tribals were often caught in the cycle of debt. Now, come to the long question answer. The tribals were people of the forest. Explain this statement. The tribal are totally dependent upon the natural resources and especially on the forest. And we have already read in the so many subtopics. You can easily elaborate this answer. They dependent upon forest produce. They do hunting, rearing, food gathering and all that. You can elaborate in your own way. What were the grievance of the tribals against the British? British people took tribal lands which was very uh, which became tribals very unhappy, and among these points, high revenue demanded, settled agriculture, role of traders and moneylenders, role of Christian missionaries, and tribal dispossessed of their land. You can elaborate it in your own way. Discuss the role of tribal chiefs under the British. Earlier, tribal chief had the all powers, but after the coming of the British, they lost their authority and became mere agents. They had to collect tax from the people, from the tribal people, and they had to pay them as a tribute to the British. And you can also elaborate this answer in your own way. This is all about the chapter. Thank you.